So hello, it's Damon's Trains and Travels and welcome to the video, and this is a review on the Bachmann Stanley that I've promised a lot of people for quite a little while now. And on Thursday I went to the National Railway Museum in New York and I met a fan of mine called Daniel who watches my videos quite a lot. So hello Daniel if you're watching. Didn't catch your last name but I'm sure you know you are. And I also went to the North Yorkshire Moors Railway at Pickering where I got to see Locomotion No. 1 in action as well, and the Flying Scotsman, which is another one of my favourite locomotives. So yeah, this year's obviously been 200 years of the railway, so there's been quite a lot on this year, and I've ended up doing a lot more and seeing a lot of things that I never thought I'd see this year. And it's also 80 years of the railway series since the first book came out in 1945, and Stanley, who I've got here, wasn't in the railway series. He was introduced in 2008 in The Great Discovery, so that was 17 years ago. And Stanley's quite a special character for a few reasons, I think it's fair to say. So he was introduced in The Great Discovery, as I said, which was the last, well not episode, but obviously feature length, but the last one to use all models. After that you had Series 12, which was a mixture of models and CGI, although in some scenes you do see the face masks on the model series on the engines. But he was the last character introduced when it was made fully using models. And also, another special thing about Stanley is that his wooden model, which I do have, a guy called Ron Fugelseth sent his toy son's wooden model of Stanley up in space. And the video went viral, and it was called A Toy Train Space. And I did a review, because the Take and Play range did a model of Stanley like this, with like a space mask on. I'm surprised the wooden range didn't, and to my knowledge it didn't. I mean, I haven't collected the wooden range for a number of years, although I have still, obviously now they don't really, obviously it's changed completely now, but from what I've seen they didn't make a model of Stanley in space. Obviously Take and Play did, which I did do a review about, and Ron Fugelseth actually commented on my video of that, which was very nice, and that's got quite a lot of views, that video. And I think it's fair to say, when I first started my channel I was doing a number of things to try and make my channel go viral. So like I had Salty pulling a cake on one of his trucks and all sorts of things, and engines next to food. It's a bit of a joke, but none of them really went viral. However, this one of Henry that I took next to a train cake at Rusden Model Weekend a few years ago did actually end up on Sam's Trains, and I do watch Sam's Trains videos quite a lot, and he's commented on a few of my videos as well. So that sort of sent a little bit of fame my way, because when that was shown a lot of people did comment and say, was that your photo on Sam's Trains and things like that. So that was quite funny. And it's funny, yeah, when I was at that model show, I was they were giving them cakes, I think they were like 50p or something like that. Not very expensive, and it was a bit of a joke because it was a green engine I put it next to Henry, although I did actually have mine back from model of Oliver, so I could have put Oliver next to him, but I didn't. But anyway, I put Henry next to it. So yeah, that's what I mean. Like I said, I tried to do a few things, I guess, when I first started my channel, to try and make it, you know, hoping it would go viral. But I think, you know, the best thing sometimes is to do stuff and not sort of, not saying don't try, but you know, just don't try too hard, because otherwise you might not get there. And sometimes in my videos I've uploaded that I've never expected have got loads of views, and at the end of the day, for me personally nowadays, though I'm still getting quite a few views, my videos are like a diary to me, and I've obviously seen a lot of things that aren't around anymore, and things have changed over the years, so it's a bit like a diary to me, really, my channel now. But you know, I'm still obviously, the more views the merrier sort of thing. But anyway, this is a model of Stanley, and I think it's an absolutely fantastic model of Stanley. And another thing that I think is quite special about Stanley is if you look at his face, it's like an arch shaped, whereas when you think about it, most of the other tank engines have round shaped faces. Another thing as well is they also have black smoke boxes usually, whereas Stanley's is silver, and like I said, his face is like an arch shape. And I suppose the only other small engine that didn't have a round face was Toby, but however, Toby's obviously a tram engine. And then obviously later after Stanley, Scruff was introduced, and he was like a tank engine, he had a square type face, but again, like I said, Scruff was after Stanley. So he's a bit unique in that sense, and also the fact he's got silver buffers, and his paintwork scheme, it's, you know, it's a bit different to a lot of the engines, although you could argue and say that each engine in Thomas is special for a different reason. But I think Stanley's sort of unique in that sense. And like I said, after the Great Discovery, he appeared quite a few times in Series 12. He only appeared in 3 episodes of Series 12, but he played quite a major part, nevertheless. And then when the show became fully CGI, he didn't really appear much. You know, on the back of the box you can see like the characters like Spencer and obviously Thomas Percy, that's like the Steam team. They were sort of like the main characters, but then the second series of the full CGI series, Stanley did come back. He didn't speak at first. He mainly was just seen in the background pulling trains and shunting and things like that. Then he did end up coming back in the 15th series, which was like the third CGI series. Did speak again then, and Day of the Diesels and that. And since then, you know, he's had a few on and off speaking parts, and you mainly see him in the background, like shunting and also working on the new branch line that went up to Harwick and things like that. So he played, nevertheless, quite a major part. And I think at the end of the day, for me, it's nicer to have Stanley appear than not appear at all, because there was a lot of engines, I'd say, between sort of Series 7 up to sort of like halfway in the CGI series. I mean, some never came back, and some did come back, like at No Duck, for example, that I quite liked. But you know, end of the day, I'd rather have a character appear at all than not at all. But you know, I think Stanley still played a significant part, nevertheless, and he's, I say, quite a popular character. And I do think this is a good model of Stanley. And when I first saw this model, I don't know, part of me thought that the funnel was a bit too tall. However, when I look at him in the CGI series, I think they've actually got the size right. And between sort of like the model series and the CGI series of the show, Stanley's appearance changed quite a bit. And also later on, he gained a headlamp on the front, as you can see here. And then obviously, if you then look at this photo here in the back, you can see the back of Stanley in the corner, and he has a lamp on the back. So, and a lot of the engines started to receive lamps later on in the CGI series, and a lot more detail. So Stanley has changed appearance quite a bit, I think it's fair to say. And also, I like what they've done here with his nameplate. His nameplate is sort of like mounted onto his body, whereas in the model series, it was sort of like printed onto his body. So I think it looks a lot better sort of mounted on. And then obviously he's got like the other details and that, and pipes and things like that that have been mounted onto his body here, which, whereas again, both model series and sort of CGI series, they were separate. However, in some cases, I think that's actually a good thing, because otherwise the model would be very, very delicate. And obviously, you've got to remember this is aimed at a slightly younger market. However, I do think that the whistle is quite fragile. Again, they haven't had the lamps on this, but I think again that's probably a good thing, because they would be quite fragile else if they had been. And again, we move on to the packaging. And as I said before, I'm not as keen on the packaging on the Bachmann models of Thomas. However, Bachmann did also at one point do Underground Ernie, and they were in actual proper boxes, which I felt protected the model a bit more. And the same with the narrow gauge engines as well. And I'd say the narrow gauge engines were definitely very delicate, and they obviously are a lot smaller as well, 009 and die cast. And this one, you sort of have to cut around to sort of destroy the box. It'd be nice if there was a box like the Hornby ones to keep them in. I mean, the Hornby ones were in polystyrene, which again is another form of plastic. I know I've said before, you know, it'd be good if we could cut down on plastic, but I do think the polystyrene protected them a lot more than what these did. Another downside, I think, to the packaging is that on the back of the boxes with the engine's eyes move from side to side. And like, so I've got this one here of Daisy, for example. It was the first one I had to hand, so I've just used this one of Daisy. So you've got Daisy's model here, then on the back it says about Daisy's eyes move from side to side, and it shows a model of Daisy. Whereas on this one of Stanley, it doesn't show Stanley, it shows Thomas. I mean, maybe it's just my box, it was a printing error, I don't know. I mean, in some of the various packaging over the years, sometimes there is errors that I've spotted and other fans have spotted. I've not got many of them myself, not all of them, but maybe this was an error on this packaging, I don't know. But I thought it'd be nice, considering obviously it's Stanley in the box, that it would show Stanley as well. And I got this model of Stanley last month from, so technically it was Tootley Thomas. However, Tootley Thomas has now opened a new shop called Trains and Bricks, which was opened by Richard Audrey, the grandson of the Reverend W. Audrey. And I got to meet him, and he signed one of the books for me as well. And I was actually the first customer in the shop to buy something, and I didn't buy this model of Stanley. I brought one of the red Funfair vans, which I will be talking about next time, or another time soon. I haven't actually recorded that video yet. I do the audio separate for the videos and the photos, but I will be recording that another time soon, hopefully. It'll definitely be this year. But like I said, I got this model of Stanley from there. And again, I think it's really nice, this model of Stanley, and his face is more of his CGI face from the CGI series. It looks a lot different in the model series. Most of the other models I have off Stanley have that, and I've also got him in the Duplo range, as you've probably seen me mention in other videos as well. And again, not all the characters made out into that, although later on Mega Bloks went on to make the Thomas range, and he appeared in that as well, and so did some other characters. So as I was saying, Stanley's face looks like it does in the CGI animated series of Thomas, rather than the model series. And in some ways I would prefer if it was the model series, but it seems that Bachmann are only really focusing on what the characters look like now in the CGI series. However, the Funfair trucks, which I will say talk about another time, it has surprised me they've brought them out, considering that they weren't in the CGI series. So I suppose it is nice for the fans that, you know, Bachmann is sort of thinking about them in some sense, of bringing characters in that weren't in the CGI series and focusing on the model series too. But I do think they've done a great job capturing Stanley's face. You know, whether it was the model series or the CGI series, I think they've done a great job capturing it. So, you know, that's a plus, I think it's fair to say. Another thing that I do think lets this model of Stanley down is the inside of the cab. If you look inside, the floor is quite raised, and from certain angles, depending on where you're standing, I think it's quite prominent that Stanley's floor is quite high. I mean, usually they don't put much detail inside the cab of most of the models. However, this one you can see into the cab quite clearly, and I think you know, particularly with like the front and the back windows, like the portholes, it'd be nice if they, I think if they just made them black and had a bit of plastic in them, just made them black or something so we couldn't see inside, personally. But obviously the windows are quite big. I mean, Stanley's also got a coal bunk on both his sides and on his back. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. And this model is new tooling from Bachmann, which I think is quite impressive. And Stanley was never in the Hornby range, and as you know, the Hornby range use a lot of tooling from other locomotives, and some of the models they didn't use the right type of locomotive for. So like, I don't know, Emily for example, or the diesel, which I think was a bit of a shame. But then they did models like Murdoch, for example, and Oliver, which I thought were absolutely fantastic, and Stepney and Spencer. You know, I absolutely love their models, and I think Hornby did a great job on them ones. But then also, I find something that I found quite weird is that Hornby actually done a model of Stanley's shed and a number of other buildings from Great Waterton, which was featured in the Great Discovery. But they never made a model of Stanley. But I think in some ways maybe it's a good thing, because otherwise if they did, it probably wouldn't look as good, because they probably used the wrong model, and maybe, I don't know, Stanley would have the wrong shaped face. I mean, if they gave Stanley the wrong shaped face, he certainly wouldn't be Stanley. And technically they got Emily's face wrong in Hornby as well. They made it absolutely huge, whereas Emily's face, as you probably know, didn't take up a whole smoke box. And I think the Bachmann model's a lot better in that sense. But I do absolutely love this model of Stanley. I wouldn't say he was my most favourite character in Thomas the Tank Engine, but you know, I do think they've done a great job on him, and it is a very nice model. And you know, I'm glad that they brought him out nevertheless as well, and Bachmann as well. He does run really nicely as well. And as you know, I haven't got my own model rail alloy at home yet for the 00 and HO scale ones. But I do obviously plan to build one eventually. But I went down to Wellingborough Museum last month and I had a run of him there. And as he was the new engine, I let him pull the new Funfair trucks that I got as well, which I'll say I will be talking about another time. He does run very well. He seems quite strong, and I'm sure if I gave him more trucks he would have pulled a lot more. But he ran very smoothly, and it's funny actually, a lot of people watched that model of Stanley and said to me he was a very smooth runner. And some people didn't realise that he was brand new, and that was the first time I'd ever run him. And technically, when you buy a new locomotive, advice I've always been given is you're supposed to run them round one way, forwards and then backwards, to wear the motor in, which technically I didn't, but you know, he ran well nevertheless. And you know, I've not really had many models that I've brought that I've had problems with. But as I was saying earlier, the packaging, like I said, I don't think it's as good, because basically I've cut around the side of the boxes, but then you have to sort of hold on to it so it doesn't slip out of the box, because of how I've cut around the sides. I don't think it protects the model as well. And as you know, I've got Ryan in the Bachmann range, and Sam's Trains did a review on Ryan, and the model got damaged slightly. The lettering got damaged because it was in the box. And I've been very lucky, touch wood, and I am actually touching wood as I say that. There's a desk right next to me, it's made out of wood. As I say, I do the audio separate for these videos. But yeah, his model of Ryan got damaged, and the only one that I've got that got damaged, and I'm getting confused myself now, either Donald or Douglas, and I believe it was Donald. The eyes, one of the eyes got damaged on Donald, rubbed away slightly, and I believe that was from being in the packaging. But with a Sharpie, I actually managed to fix it, and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference, although you probably could use paint to fix it as well. But I just used a Sharpie that was black, obviously. So that was my model of Stanley running. And like I said, I do think he is a very nice model. Like I said, there's a few things that I think are wrong with him. Like I said, like the inside of the cab and that. And like I said, the funnel's probably a bit questionable, sort of thing. So, you know, and I'd be lying, I think, if I said he was an absolutely perfect model. But I think he is a great model nevertheless, and I do recommend that you get him if you can. But I've given this Stanley a 9 out of 10. Because, like I say, for me, he wasn't quite there to give a 10 out of 10. But, you know, a great model nevertheless. You know, for me, very mixed feelings, but on the whole, very good. And thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.